Welcome to this IUN Community Garden Session, Health Benefits of Gardening. I'm Leslie Kaiser, Program Coordinator for CURE and today's moderator. The presenter for today's sessions are Linda Curley, Julia Miller, and Rebecca Koetz. Linda Curley is a health and human sciences educator for Purdue University Extension. She holds a master's degree from Purdue University. Linda serves on the statewide Purdue Extension Mastering Home Food Preservation team. She is a certified Serve Safe instructor, proctor, teaching food safety principles to food service workers or anyone providing prepared foods to the general public. In her educator position, the Health and Human Sciences program area provides community education focused on food, family, finance, and wellness. Julia Miller is the 4-H Youth Development Extension Educator for Stark County. She has served in this role for about 7 years and was in Northeast Indiana for 3 years. Julia has a Bachelor of Science in Agronomics, Business, and Marketing, and a master's degree in Youth Development and Agricultural Education. Her main focuses are youth leadership development, adult volunteer development, and STEM activities with youth. Rebecca Koetz is the Lake County Urban Agriculture Extension Educator through Purdue Extension. She works out of the Crown Point office. Rebecca graduated from Purdue University with degrees in wildlife and forestry and natural resources. She enjoys growing vegetables and food for pollinators in her own yard. Rebecca also enjoys helping people grow their own food and enjoy the outdoors. She can be reached at bussser@purdue.edu. Welcome, we're glad to have you with us today.
Thank you. We're excited to be here today to share this information with health benefits of gardening. I am Julia Miller, the 4-H educator in Stark County, and today we're going to talk about different parts of gardening and with physical benefits, the emotional and health benefits of gardening, also techniques for people that have different abilities and how they can engage mindfully in the garden. So some questions to think about. How do you think gardening can or cannot affect the physical health? Also, are there potential physical limitations when gardening? The gardening can have exercise level. It's a great way to have exercise level activities. A moderate intensity level activity for 2.5 hours a week, according to the CDC, the Centers for Disease and Control Prevention, says that the 2.5 hours each week can reduce the risk of obesity, your high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, heart disease, stroke, depression, colon cancer, and premature death. So just working for 2.5 hours a week with moderate intensity can help reduce the risk of any of those issues. Also, the CDC considers gardening to be a moderate intensity level activity, and that can really help you achieve that 2.5 hour goal each week through different types of gardening that you can add with other types of activity. So those that choose gardening as their moderate intensity exercise are more likely actually to exercise 40 to 50 minutes longer on average than those who may choose something like walking or biking. So gardening can be a different way to get that moderate intensity level activity. Providing that moderate to vigorous physical activity, it's a great way, you can use that with using hand tools. So using the hand tools in the garden or while you're landscaping around your house and your garden, those help provide that moderate activity. You can do a variety of exercises where you're lifting things up, you're squatting, pushing, pulling, stepping from side to side, back to forward. Just think of all the different ways you're working in the garden or while you're landscaping that you're using your muscles in your body to provide that different type of physical activity. Gardening also does give you the opportunity to grow food, fresh food, which is awesome to have. Nothing maintains your immune system and general health and energy like fresh fruits and vegetables, which are most nutritious right after harvest. So gardening can provide that health-enhancing, weight-bearing exercise, moving around, like I said, jumping, moving, stepping, pushing, pulling. It can burn more calories, and you can build those strong muscles and your bones while supporting your balance and endurance while working in your garden and landscaping. You can increase overall levels of your physical activity and fitness through gardening. That you can help burn more calories in that 2.5 hours a week, and that helps to contribute to your healthy weight management, that can help keep down obesity, decrease likelihood of stroke or other issues in the future. So your garden tasks usually can utilize both upper body and lower body. When you're digging, turning compost, raking, just digging in the ground, putting new things in, bending up and down, you use all of your whole body when working in the garden. Some other tasks that use mostly just your upper body while you're standing, or even if you're squatting, just mixing your soil, sometimes weeding. So if you're down sitting and weeding or sitting on a chair, that's just moving your upper body, but you can use your whole body right in the garden also. It is medically proven that people who do that regular physical activity have a 35% lower risk of heart disease and stroke. So having that exercise, it is essential to living a healthy and fulfilling life. Like I said, it's proven that you can have a 35% lower risk of heart disease and stroke through regular physical activity. And gardening can help keep you fit and healthy by doing those different types of activities. A lesser known role that gardening can play is in helping keep you fit and healthy. The number of calories that you can burn while working just for 30 minutes in your garden is comparable to playing volleyball or practicing yoga for the same amount of time. So just going outside and raking, digging up holes, working in your garden will give you that same amount of calorie burn as you can have with yoga or volleyball the same amount of time. But there is, like any other physical activity, like running, weightlifting, or volleyball, you can have the potential for injury if not done correctly. As you can see in this picture, she is bent more at an angle, which can lead to potential injury in her back or her leg. So it's better to always make sure you're working to prevent any potential injuries from happening.
So now it's my turn to introduce a topic to you. My name is Linda Curley, and I work out of the Lake County office. I'm the health and human science educator there. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the mental health benefits of gardening. And I just have a question for you. When we have beautiful weather in Northwest Indiana, do you not feel really invigorated? Instead of looking at a screen oftentimes where the weather forecaster is telling you that it's going to be kind of dreary out and cloudy and cold, and you kind of shiver in your bones thinking about it. So when I see a beautiful forecast similar to the one we're supposed to have this week, I know that it lifts my mood and energy, and you may be thinking that it does the same. There is a lot of research behind this idea of us feeling really great when we have nature present and around us. So a couple of articles that were currently written, one from the Journal of Physiology and Anthropology, as well as the National Institute on Health, have both said that in terms of plants, in terms of wildlife, in terms of us bringing even potted plants into our home environment, it has proven to have a health benefit to us, meaning that our mood is lifted. We feel a little less gloomy about things, and we can often see, through perhaps a fog or something that we're feeling is weighing heavy on us. So it really does bring us this bout of mental health boost. So a San Francisco Bay Hospital did a study, and they had patients in hospital rooms that were very barren. So it would be, the bed, the television set, maybe some pictures on the wall, but the pictures were of abstract art. And in other rooms, they had patients with potted plants. They had pictures on the walls that had nature in them. And, 79% of the folks that they interviewed in each of these environments, because each of them had the ability to be in each environment, 79% of folks felt much more calm. Their mood was lifted. 19% even felt stronger in their environment. And, oftentimes when you're in the hospital, you're weak. You feel kind of helpless at times. So this was a study that really proved to folks that it was important that we think about the environment of those that really need to heal. Folks were more optimistic. They were happier. And so they realized too that flowers evoke positive emotions. In some studies, folks would give a gift of flowers to an individual, and that individual was still feeling the high of getting the flowers 3 days out. So certainly when someone gives you a gift, you feel great about it. But the flowers also were evoking positive emotion with folks. And then, you know, gardening really does remind us of our connection to nature. We don't often have control of everything in nature, but certainly it gives us this idea that we are, you know, part of it. And actually, when we do garden and that physical activity that Julia was just talking about a few minutes ago, that physical activity releases serotonin and dopamine into our system, which in fact we call that feel good kind of a drug to us that raises our feelings about ourselves, about our environment and things around us. So again, the mental health benefit here is super important. And I have one more slide, Becca, if you want to advance now. So the one thing that we want folks to remember is that Mother Nature can play lots of tricks on us. And oftentimes we don't have control of our environment. So rain and cold and sun and even drought, invasion of weeds and pests and so forth. We can often feel a little bit anxious when we want something to look exactly like we'd like it to look, when in fact Mother Nature won't let that happen all the time. You know, a couple of years ago, we started in our family to become beekeepers, and we realized that we needed to let our environment kind of go free for the bees, for the benefit of the bees. And I have to tell you, it was such a freeing feeling not to be so controlling of the environment that we wanted to look beautiful. And there is a lot of beauty in what nature provides us on its own without us interrupting it. So just remember that once we accept that we can't be in control of the environment when it comes to nature, that we are more at peace and we are getting that benefit, that mental health benefit from gardening.
Thank you, Linda, for that connection of mental health with gardening and those benefits. So stress can affect all systems of our body, including the musculoskeletal, the respiratory, cardiovascular, reproductive, gastrointestinal, and gardening has scientifically proven to be a stress reliever. And we all have stress in different ways, and it affects us different ways. And so gardening is a good way to help reduce that stress. And that stress can cause us to be more irritable, have headaches, stomach aches, like I said, working with the intestines, heart attacks, and worsen even pre-existing conditions within our bodies. So test subjects that gardened experienced a more significant decrease in stress compared to those subjects that were assigned to read in an experiment published in the Journal of Health Psychology. So those that were dealing with stress through gardening actually had more decreased stress than those who were just assigned to read in that. So having that physical activity, gardening, really helps them. And exercising both with your arms and your legs, your whole body, as I mentioned earlier, your upper body and body, is recommended to help prevent other illnesses like coronary disease. Some other great benefits, health benefits from gardening. Studies have shown that fresh air is good for helping to clean out your lungs, improve your circulation, providing greater energy and vitality to you. It also increases your oxygen intake, and that helps to boost as your brain levels of serotonin, as Linda mentioned earlier. So kind of the neurotransmitter nicknamed the happy chemical, because it helps combat that anxiety and depression that you may have when you're stressed out. So helping increase a healthy emotional state through the fresh air. Also, we know that exposure to soil microbes, particularly in childhood, helps to build a more robust immune system and hopefully to provide resistance to asthma and allergies as people continue through their lives. Recent studies demonstrate that those soil microbes can act as an antidepressant as well, because it activates a group of neurons responsible for producing that serotonin again. So having that, those soil microbes working in the soil, getting your hands in there, is another great health benefit of gardening. Sunlight. Sunlight can entice our brain to produce even more of that serotonin, which is why sunlight can be an effective antidepressant and treatment for seasonal affective disorder. So being out in your gardens, even throughout in the not in the summertime, throughout the year, can help you with antidepressant and making sure to get as much as that sunlight in, because your skin absorbs that vitamin D when it is exposed to sunlight. But too much sunlight can have some risk when not protected. So always think about that, such as skin cancer. So making sure to have protection from that, or have moderate amounts of exposure to sunlight. And vitamin D is essential for numerous body functions that we have. And upon the exposure to sunlight, when the skin gets and metabolizes your vitamin D, it's the only major vitamin that's produced that way. And it's essential for numerous body functions, including lowering blood pressure, helping to improve your bone strength and brain functioning. And another way to think of benefits of gardening is through therapeutic effects. They can be either for mental or physical trauma situations that have happened to somebody. This kind of goes along with what Linda had mentioned earlier too, that nurturing a plant can provide a way to work through issues and heal wounds, that just being around that nature can really increase that for people. And cultivating plants can also help improve mental states when they're recovering through some sort of traumatic issue. And gardening can sometimes be difficult if you have physical limitations, and there are challenges, but there are great ways that you can modify your tasks or have assistive technology. So if you have a limited mobility, try to reduce any distance between where you keep where you have your garden and where you store your materials for that. Try to keep it as close together as you can if you have that limited mobility. And use some sort of assistive cart or mobility scooter or some kind of wagon that you can use to move your tools around. If you're standing for long periods of time, it bothers your legs, your knees, or your back, use a stool or a chair in the garden and try to wear a knee brace to help give support to your knee. If you get tired too quickly, fatigued, try to work during the first part of the day when you're more rested and take breaks. It's okay to take those breaks. And you can alternate between difficult and easy tasks. If you're really using a rake or a hoe to dig up weeds and then you need to take a break and do something easier, that's okay. That's a great way to go between tasks. And if you have a challenge of not being able to get up while sitting on the ground, use that stool or chair again in the garden. That's a great way to be able to get up and down easier and not put more pressure on different parts of your body that it hurts. Also, raised bed gardens are another great way. So if you don't want to be able to bend down, so have some sort of raised bed garden to keep your everything up higher. And you can find tools or learn how to use tools to reach and farther distances is another way to assist with technology. Gardening style changes, make sure you do stretch before and after working the garden just to get those muscles worked out, those tendons, make sure you get that all ready to go for the day and you cool down. As I mentioned earlier, break your tasks into separate jobs. Do them in 20-minute increments, even 10 minutes, just to do different things throughout the day. Take those regular breaks, allowing your body to rest and recover. Reduce those distances to carry any of your tools or supplies, or find ways to use those to have a wagon or a wheelbarrow to push those around. And try to, you can use push-pull tools with palms instead of your fingers, because then using more of not stretching out your fingers too much, but using more of your strength with your palms. And you can look into, do more extra research for other alternative gardening methods out there that you could do to reduce the weeding and watering that's required for your garden. So if there's something different you can do, you can look more into that, what would work for where you have your garden, whether it's on the ground or a raised bed. And try to complete those more physically demanding tasks earlier in the day when you're more rested. Also when it's cooler, because in the summertime it can get hot in the middle of the day towards the afternoon. So complete those tasks more earlier in the day so you don't overextenuate yourself. Here's some ideas of using assistive technology. You can see that in the picture she's using something to kneel on, so that spreads out the pressure put on her knee. So it's using an extra kneeling pad. You can use those gloves to keep your hands safer from digging in the soil if you need to, or from thorns or other things. Sometimes wearing an apron helps you keep track of your gardening tools so you don't lose them throughout the garden. Using tools that are handled or with extended handles to more ergonomic to work in your garden. And there's an example of a two-wheeled wheelbarrow instead of a white one because it's a lighter weight one and it's easier to push when you have those two wheels in the one. There are different kinds of garden seaters that are readily available, and there's several variations that can meet if you need just something simple or if you have a bigger garden to like something to roll it out. Here's some ideas of alternative garden types. You can see the garden containers. You're necessarily all the way down on the ground then, and those are something that you can put on your back deck or porch. Window boxes, hanging baskets. You can see the trellises also on the wooden trellis and on the fence. So that way there's room for them to grow up. And that wooden trellis also has a raised bed, so you're not having to bend over as much and being more strenuous on your body. So there's some other ideas that you can see pictures of for alternative garden types. So kind of in conclusion with the physical, gardening combines that physical activity, your upper body, your lower body, all different parts by pushing, pulling, standing up and down, and using all different kinds of muscles. It combines that physical activity and social interaction with nature and sunlight. And that sunlight can help to lower your blood pressure as well as increase vitamin D levels in the summer that can help with other parts of your body. Your gardening can also help build dexterity and strength and being able to build those bones stronger. Doing that extra digging, raking, mowing are as big calorie burners as you can do while playing some certain sports. So getting that regular moderate intensity exercise can help reduce that risk of dementia, mental health problems, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and certain kinds of cancers. So gardening is considered that moderate intensity exercise.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about gardening, designing a garden, or gardening for accessibility. So whether you are someone who has accessibility issues or arthritis or different, gardening is for all body types. It can be so many different kinds of intensity levels, just like Julia was mentioning, and it has so many physical and mental health benefits like Linda and Julia were mentioning. So if you are considering gardening and you have accessibility issues, or you're designing a garden for people with accessibility issues, here are some considerations. If you have a fence or you're planning to put some sort of fence in, you might consider having a gate to the garden with an easy open handle. So you should be able to open the gate with one closed fist hand, which will help people who have joint issues. So you can do a closed fist entryway test into your garden. Just close your fist and try to open the gate or door with only your arm, not your hand. And if you can do that, then it would be considered accessible. Fences, if you are considering putting one up, can actually help people with low vision and blindness feel safer in the garden because they know their surroundings, they know the space is safe, and they're not going to go out of the garden area, and likewise nothing that they don't want in the garden can come in. You might also consider designing your pathways with accessibility between the garden beds, the spacing, and the sizing in mind. So raised beds should be between 28 and 34 inches high and 2 feet wide, no more than 2 feet wide, and beds should be at least 3 feet apart. So that would help someone who is in a scooter or a wheelchair or on crutches be able to go between the beds easily. And then the 2 feet wide rule is so that you can reach across the garden and reach all parts of the raised bed. If you were up against a wall, if the bed was up against a wall and you couldn't get to the other side, you might even consider having it no more than just a foot across, but definitely no more than 2 feet. And then 60-inch diameter turning points should be placed throughout the garden, again, for people with scooters or wheelchairs or crutches, at least on either end of the garden so people can turn around. Pathways should be level, hard, and pervious to prevent ponding and slippery surfaces. So this can be done using different pervious pavements, cobblestone, or other materials. And this information is from Universal Design and is a recommended resource later in the presentation. Grass pathways should be maintained, mowed regularly, And typically raised beds only need between 6 and 12 inches of soil, depending on what's being grown. There's an excellent Purdue publication out there on container and raised bed gardens, and it talks about how much soil you need for different kinds of plants. So of course you would need more to grow potatoes compared to greens, for example. But if your raised bed is accessible, it's typically going to be taller than 6 to 12 inches. And you don't necessarily want to have to fill that entire bed with soil because soil can be expensive. So you might consider raising the soil up using a hugelkultur method, where you put something in the bottom of the bed to then put the soil on top of to raise that soil up. And traditionally in hugelkultur, you're using wood or mulch or something that's going to eventually break down and give organic matter back to the soil. But you can also do this using recycled materials like milk crates or old gardening materials so that you can raise the soil up. And then just making sure that there's something to catch the soil and keep it from falling through the cracks. And that way you can avoid filling a very deep bed with soil. If you're designing a garden to engage the community and you want it to be accessible to all patrons, here's some other considerations for different things you might want to have on site. You at least want to have some gloves available for your patrons. And if you're growing outdoors in ground or in raised beds, you might consider purchasing hand trowels, wheelbarrows, a couple of wheelbarrows, or carts that might be easier to manage, or maybe one of those wheelbarrows that Julia was showing that have 2 or more wheels that are easier than the 1-wheel traditional wheelbarrows that we think of. You might consider a few long handle shovels, a few long handle hoes that are more accessible for people to use while standing or sitting up higher. And then you can also make existing tools more accessible by adding leather, foam, or rubber to improve the grip. Or you can purchase some ergonomic tools or extended reach tools. And then again, kneeling pads, garden chairs, things like that. Something you might consider purchasing for people who are low vision or blind would be garden speakers that describe what's being grown. So kind of like having a sign in your garden or garden labels, but instead it would be more auditory. And that's something that our local Blind Social Center in Gary is implementing in their garden bed. So a nifty tip there. And you also would consider where you're storing your tools and making sure that it's accessible for people and near the garden. And then if you are working with community members or you're teaching a class, making sure that people will have proper clothing and that they could be comfortable and have appropriate attire when working in the garden. So maybe that's something to invest in, is having some extra smocks or closed-toed shoes on site. Tool belts that are easy to make. You can find some handmade tool belt ideas online. And then, is there water on site? Making sure that it's accessible, and thinking about what kind of garden you're going to be designing. So edible plants tend to need more water than native perennial plants that you might find in a pollinator garden or a sensory garden. Making sure that the water, you have a hose long enough to reach the garden, and a hose reel or cart can actually really come in handy. And if there's not water on site, consider purchasing a rain barrel or some way to collect water so you're not having to transport buckets of water back and forth to the site. And having at least one lightweight watering can and a self-coiling hose on site for accessibility purposes. And making sure that hoses aren't more than 40 inches above the ground and are easy to use. And then lastly, making sure that your site doesn't have any potential risks like poison ivy, ogre, sumac, brambles, unless you have a designated area for your brambles, for your fruit. And just keeping an eye out for biting or stinging insects that move into areas where you don't want them. those ground nesting bees and things that like to make homes in our gardens that we appreciate for their pollinating purposes, but not always necessarily to live directly in the garden. So those are all different considerations when engaging people of all abilities in the garden. And here are some general tips for engaging all people in the garden. So we mentioned before that it's typically recommended to work during the first part of the day when gardeners are well rested and the weather is cooler, or in the late afternoon, it might start to be cooler. However, certain groups of people do take longer to get ready in the morning. So for example, people with low vision and blindness tend to be ready later in the day. So keeping that in mind when you're scheduling community work days. And in that instance, it would be better to work in the late afternoon where it can still be cooler compared to the early morning. And then of course, just to reiterate what Julia was talking about, taking regular breaks, alternating between difficult and easy tasks, providing seating for gardeners to rest at, providing carts and carry tools, and avoid tasks requiring long periods of gripping, encouraging proper posture and apparel, and engaging gardeners in some warm-up activities. So there's some good activities shown on this slide from Arthritis and Gardening, the National Agribility Project. So these are things that everyone can do to warm up and get ready for work in the garden. And here are some different activity ideas for engaging mindfully in the garden. So really taking to heart the mental and emotional, as well as the physical benefits that come with gardening. Some things that we can do as individuals or with groups that we work with. So there are lots of garden crafts that you can do throughout the seasons. Building a pine cone bird feeder is a traditional one that a lot of people have done as kids, but even doing these crafts as adults can really encourage mindfulness. And it's a great activity for people with lower motor skills as well. And they can make a nice addition to the garden and draw our birds and pollinators. And there are also other crafts that you can find online. You know, the common websites that we go to for crafty ideas. You can find crafts that you can do throughout the seasons, like holiday wreaths. You can do a different holiday wreath for every holiday throughout the growing season. And that's a great way to really engage mindfully, bringing nature inside or doing it outside in the garden. You can also practice garden tasks indoors before going out in the garden when working with certain groups to help people build their motor skills. An example of something that can help build motor skills would be raking, which is easier than digging for people with the lower motor skills to help people build their strength. Another activity would be planting indoors. So you can start your plants inside or do an indoor container garden project like herbs. That's a really nifty way to get people engaged in the garden before even going outside. Or watering the garden using watering bottles with holes punched in the cap is a nice way for people with joint issues, arthritis, or lower motor skills to get engaged in the garden. And patrons with intermediate motor skills might find certain repetitious tasks easy and rewarding, like filling indoor seed trays, for example. And then for anyone engaging in the garden, doing things like meditating, yoga, reading in the garden, just getting outside and reading, journaling or drawing, making regular observations, focusing on those senses, breaking down each sense, and really just being mindful in the garden is something that we can do regardless of how much time we have or any ability to actually grow anything in the garden. This is something that any of us can do in all ages and abilities. And since we have a little extra time, I'm also going to highlight this resource, Health Benefits of Connecting with Nature. And it's focused on nature generally, but this can definitely apply to our gardening activities. So whether you work with youth or adults, or you're just an individual, this is a lesson plan that's all around engaging your senses and learning how our health relates to nature, and it can be applied in the garden. So you could find this lesson at www.purdue.edu/nature. And I'd like to engage us all in a short guided meditation. So anybody that's listening to this presentation can close your eyes and breathe deeply. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. And then out for 6 counts. So we'll breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can continue to do that on your own. Imagine that you're standing in a garden, surrounded by plants, tall and small, full of deep green leaves. There's a pond nearby and a gently blowing breeze. As you look around your garden, you hear birds chirping, see them fluttering. What else do you hear in the garden? What do you see? Can you smell the fresh air and feel the breeze on your skin? Take another deep breath, count to 3, and slowly open your eyes. So that was slightly adapted. Every time I said garden, it actually says forest in the lesson plan, but you can see how it can be easily adapted and something to use with kiddos or adults in your life. And something that we can all do as individuals out in the garden, just being mindful and recording our senses and taking some time out in nature. So with that, I just want to highlight our resources that we used in the presentation. And I'd like to thank everybody for your time.
Thank you to our participants for attending. And then I would also like to thank Rebecca, Linda, and Julia for the presentation today and for sharing the valuable information.
Thanks for having us.